The clerk will read the order of the day. We move on to general business.
General business notice number 1, standing in the name of Ms Ubo to move a motion concerning bipartisan delegation to Canberra, family, domestic and sexual violence.
I call the member for Arnhem.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And do I need to remove that motion, Mr Clark? Yep. So I move the motion, and I apologise, I don't have a pink folder on my desk.
Have we...
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chief Minister. Madam Speaker, I move that the Assembly formally acknowledge the unacceptable rates of domestic, family and sexual violence within the Northern Territory and endorse the formation of a bipartisan delegation to Canberra comprising of members of the CLP government, the Labor opposition and the crossbench, standing alongside victim survivors, DFSV experts and frontline workers. The purpose of this delegation will be to advocate for significant federal investment in initiatives aimed at combating domestic, family and sexual violence, underscoring our collective commitment to addressing this critical issue. Madam Speaker, speaking to the motion, domestic and family violence in the Northern Territory has claimed too many lives and affected far too many Territory women, children and young people. This issue transcends politics, and Territory Labor opposition proposes a bipartisan delegation to travel to Canberra comprising of CLP government members, Territory Labor opposition members and crossbench representative members. Together, Madam Speaker, we will stand with victim survivors and the domestic, family, sexual violence prevention experts and frontline workers to advocate for needs-based funding for the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, yesterday we heard in question time that the Chief Minister, Lia Finocchiaro, agreed to this proposal, and we congratulate and thank the Chief Minister for agreeing with the Labor opposition and the crossbench for this very important motion. A united Territory approach is crucial when we're talking about advocating at the federal level to ensure that needs-based funding is delivered once and for all for the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, the federal Labor government recognises the national shame and disgrace of domestic violence not only in the Northern Territory but unfortunately right across the country. Our Parliament's diverse composition, reflecting the federal Parliament's makeup, enables effective collaboration between Labor, Liberal, Greens, minor parties and community independent members to advocate for the Territory. We continue to call on the CLP government to urgently implement the coroner's 35 recommendations, which were handed down with the 17-month-long inquest that was handed down, the recommendations handed down just this week, Madam Speaker, as I'm sure everyone in this chamber and House is aware. We urge the CLP government to roll out the much-needed $180 million to the domestic, family and sexual violence sector to ensure that the 35 recommendations from the coroner are implemented. Madam Speaker, we recognise in Territory Labor that we must listen to experts and consider their advice on legislation, including the floor-price discussion around alcohol. Now, I note that the Attorney-General has given notice of this, so I won't talk too much. I don't want to preempt debate, but this was a part of the recommendation 5 by the coroner to reduce the availability of alcohol because of the impact and exacerbation on family, domestic and sexual violence in the Northern Territory. So I'll leave that part there just so I don't cross over lines, Madam Speaker. We want to ensure, Madam Speaker, from the Territory Labor's perspective, that protecting children and families across the Northern Territory demands swift action. We would like to see, Madam Speaker, the CLP government pledge to avoid the status quo that we are seeing right now across the Territory, in urging the CLP government to ensure that they prioritise, on behalf of Territorians, the needs of domestic, family and sexual violence prevention sector, ensuring that the hard work that they have done for many months and years is resourced through the rollout of the $180 million that the CLP government made in their election commitment to match the Territory Labor government at the time's commitment for the Territory election. The hard work has been done, and we already, Madam Speaker, have said openly we will support the CLP in their endeavours to reduce and prevent family and domestic violence in the Northern Territory and sexual violence in the Northern Territory by ensuring that our sector is appropriately resourced. We know that there has been a lot of work done within government and non-government, Madam Speaker, so we do urge the CLP to take on their very important role of leadership in this space. We will stand with them and support them, and I know that the crossbench of this House has spoken about supporting that as well. Of course, not speaking for them, but just echoing that they have reached out across all party lines to ensure that this is an area that is far beyond politics. It's about Territory families, women and children in particular. Madam Speaker, the support of Territory Labor and Federal Labor, the CLP, our Federal Liberal Nationals and our crossbench has to be above politics, as I've said. We want everyone to be on board, regardless of political cycles. Madam Speaker, we acknowledge that the Commonwealth contributes $147 million over 4 years for family and domestic violence services in the Northern Territory. We do not think this is enough, but we know it's a start, and we are simply calling on the federal government and those who wish maybe to be in the future federal government to sit with us here in the Territory, across all party lines and across the hardworking sector, to make sure that we do not lose more Territory women, we do not traumatise more Territory kids through family, domestic and sexual violence around the Northern Territory. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I spoke with the opposition leader at about 11 o'clock this morning and provided her with a proposed amendment to the motion. Given that the original motion brought by the opposition was that we travel down to Canberra, I felt it much more important that Canberra come to us on this issue. Equally, the last sittings of federal parliament is about to wrap up. Politicians don't generally hang around Canberra, they go back to their electorates, and so I didn't want this to be kicked down the road, and so the opposition leader had time to look at our amendment and agreed. So I'll now move the amendment given it is agreed to so that it can be properly circulated to all members before I continue with my contribution. I move the following amendment. 1, in the title of the motion, omit 2 after the word delegation and insert from. Number 2, omit all words after within the Northern Territory and insert the following words. Call on the Commonwealth Government, both Senators of the Northern Territory and both Territorian members of the House of Representatives to immediately visit the Territory and pledge its support to combat DFSV in the Territory in a bipartisan show of strength alongside members of the CLP government, the Labor opposition and the crossbench, standing alongside victim survivors, DFSV experts and frontline workers. The purpose of this bipartisan pledge will be to advocate for significant federal investment in initiatives aimed at combating domestic, family and sexual violence, underscoring our collective commitment to addressing the critical issues. Thank you. That will now be circulated, but as I said, the opposition have had hours of seeing that there is agreement across the chamber, and I believe the crossbench have been consulted by the opposition on it. It's really important as part of our amendment, Madam Speaker, that we also include our territory-based federal representatives. At the end of the day, we have a Labor government at a federal level. We have a Labor minister in Senator McCarthy, and we have the Labor member for Lingiari in Marion Scrimgeour, and we have a Labor member for Solomon in Luke Gosling. Well, of course, we have our Senator Jacinta Price. But we have 3 out of 4 sit on the government benches. And so their influence and input into this is pivotal to yielding an outcome from the federal government, because let's just be really plain and face facts about this. We've had a Labor government for 8 years who were not, during their time in Territory Parliament and in government, able to secure additional funding from the federal government. We have come into government, the CLP. went straight to National Cabinet, which was discussing the national response to domestic and family violence, and could not broker a better outcome for the Territory. So it is very clear to me, whilst we will never give up, Madam Speaker, that the people who need to be held accountable for their role in lobbying for the Territory are the 3 Labor members, and of course our senator has a role to play, but being in opposition, that's clearly much more difficult. So we look forward to this work ahead. There is precedence for this, of course. We saw the Prime Minister, then Malcolm Turnbull, go to Alice Springs and eventually announce the Barkly Regional Deal following the horrific sexual assault that took place of the toddler back in 2018. We then saw this again when in 2023, in January at the start of that year, Prime Minister Albanese had to fly to Alice Springs to give Labor a stern lesson in the lifting of stronger futures and getting them to make sure that they put that community back on a better footing. And of course, he announced the $250 million. Now, I've got significant concerns and reservations on how that money is being spent, and I've raised that directly with the Prime Minister because ultimately the Territory doesn't have a lot of control over that funding. And of course, we all know the woes of the Barkly Regional Deal. So I hope moving forward we can get this level of representation in the Territory to consider this deal properly and what kind of resources it's really going to need. Because I think I said yesterday, what's currently on offer isn't going to touch the sides. But we will play our role. We will do what is required from a Territory level with the resources we have and the commitments we've made. And we stand by our decision to move carefully through the recommendations of the coroner to make deliberate moves that are going to advance the interests of safety of Territory women and children, because we know this issue is completely unacceptable. The rates are just far too high, and it is very clear to me that the Territory on its own cannot deliver the funding that is required, and therefore there is no other alternative but for the Commonwealth to step up and play its role. Whether it chooses to do that will remain to be seen. But we are committed to the process. We thank the opposition for putting forward this idea and for supporting our amendment, which is just practically a better outcome for the Territory. And I think it's probably healthy to have these federal pollies in town more often. And, it never hurts. It's always good to get down to Canberra, but I tell you what, it's good to get them up here too, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Guadja.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do want to acknowledge the Leader of the Opposition, Selina Yurobo, the member for Arnhem, for bringing the motion to the Assembly and working with the crossbench and the government to see this parliament coming together in a bipartisan nature. I want to acknowledge the Chief Minister putting forward an amendment. I do understand that following out the position yesterday, there have been a number of people who want to participate in that delegation. So certainly, having heard the number of people wanting to participate in that being quite substantial, that it is important to now have that delegation from Canberra come to the Northern Territory where they can have access to more Territorians who are experts in domestic, family and sexual violence, who are victim survivors, and it might award them the opportunity to visit a number of these amazing organisations and shelters and crisis accommodation in the Territory, and particularly in our remote and regional areas. I wanted to say in response to the amendment, I think it's great to bring a delegation here. I think as a parliament, though, we'll absolutely need to work together to ensure that the voices of Central Australia, of the Barkly, of Big Rivers and East Arnhem are all represented, and that we work together to make sure that we get people, organisations and victim survivors who want to participate in this have the opportunity and the resourcing support to come to Darwin if that's where this is held, or whether it's held in Alice Springs and the delegation asks members to go down there, that we look at providing some support for people to get to that important meeting to talk about these concerns. I do just want to raise in the amendment, I think it is important to have the Commonwealth Government here Of course, Senator Mullendeary McCarthy, who is no stranger to the Northern Territory. She is a proud Territorian. She is the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, who's continuing to invest in the Northern Territory and right across Australia. Of course, Marion Scrimminger, the member for Lingiari, and of course Luke Gosling, who seems to be at every event that you attend in Darwin, and of course Senator Price, who can participate in this important delegation. I think it's important that we talk here tonight around some flexibility that needs to be awarded to the delegation. I think that we need to make sure as well that we don't let the federal coalition off the hook as well, that they commit to standing tall and supporting and resourcing this important matter that we are talking about here. I think we've heard, again, in this chamber, we've heard in the community, we've seen in the news nationally, particularly as we are working through the 16 days of activism around the important work that is being done. And I want to acknowledge, while we are calling for additional resources, there certainly is a lot that is being done in this space. And absolutely, I am going to say that money has been invested by both federal governments. It's not a matter of one or the other. The former federal government, the Morrison Liberal coalition, we did see under the Minister Anne Ruston at the time that there was additional funds and resources brought in. We've seen that continuing investment. We've seen the increase in investment under Amanda Rishworth as well. So there is significant work that is being undertaken, Madam Speaker, and I felt that that was particularly important to highlight. I do also want to acknowledge again the sector, the women's family violence sector, the women's legal services, the homelessness shelters, the men's behavioural change organisations like Tangentyere Council, Catholic Care in Darwin, who deliver that program, is really incredibly important, Madam Speaker. Again, I think this will be a really important moment. We all spoke in this chamber yesterday around 50 years and acknowledging the amazing contributions that have happened over 50 years. And I think where we are yesterday and today will be an important milestone for the Territory's future, where this Parliament has come together to resolve a really important matter and a topic, to call on the Federal Parliament, all members of the Federal Parliament, to take note of what needs to be done in the Northern Territory and the assistance, acknowledging that both major parties in the Northern Territory did go to the election with the $180 million commitment. Obviously, we have different ideas on where and how that money should be spent, but I think, Madam Speaker, it is incredibly important to just acknowledge the sheer importance of our unified Territory Legislative Assembly on this particular matter is incredibly important. Madam Speaker, I think, as I have said earlier, and I'll begin to close, I think it is important when we do look at bringing a delegation here that it is not just a meeting in a room. Hopefully we can work with the Chief Minister when they're organising the delegation around making sure that we can get people out to various establishments, organisations, and meeting with various groups to hear firsthand how they think investments can be done, whether that's financial or whether that's legislative changes in the Territory or in the Commonwealth Parliament. How that work can happen, I think, will be incredibly important. Madam Speaker, I just also wanted to acknowledge that we have spoken at great length around monitoring, evaluation and accountability, and I do absolutely think that is important. That was work that was being done by the ICRO. It was work that was being done by the sector. So I do just want to say that there is a plan. I seek leave to table that plan for Hansard, Madam Speaker. That is the Monitoring, Evaluation and Accountability Plan for the Northern Territory Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Framework 2018 to 2028 and its action plans. And that does have quite a detailed response in that plan around data, Madam Speaker, around working through those action plans. And I think you'll note Part 6 of that talks about the evaluation plans, 6.2, the outcomes of the evaluation, and 6.3, the flagship review. So, Madam Speaker, I do seek leave to table that.
Is leave granted? All those in favour say aye.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just to digress for a moment, I just want to acknowledge there's been a lot of stuff happening in federal parliament this week as well. That is relevant to this topic that we're talking about. And there's been federal inquiries around the deaths of Aboriginal women. Senator Malarndirri McCarthy, the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, has responded to that, and I take note she has a series of outcomes and actions that she's taking on as the federal minister around responding to that. But that led me to think this morning around how we all as parliamentarians and as the Territory's media respond and report on domestic, family and sexual violence. And I wanted to just take a moment to draw members' attention to a volume of work that was done. It was done by the Northern Territory Government. It was done in collaboration with Tangentyere Council Women's Family Violence Program, and it was done in conjunction with, I believe, the Australian National University. And what they did was they did changing the story, the media story, around ethical, responsible and respectful ways of reporting domestic, family and sexual violence in the Northern Territory. I want to acknowledge that certainly Shirlene Campbell was heavily involved from Hoppy's Camp in Alice Springs, and Dr. Shay Brown was heavily involved in that. It's just a really good document for honourable members to download. It's available online. Changing the story just reminds us and reminds the media around the appropriateness, the cultural responsibility and respectfulness that we should have when we are reporting those instances around using the appropriate names and seeking permission and so forth. So it is incredibly important. I do want to again acknowledge the 35 recommendations. I understand the Minister for the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence is working through the government's response to those recommendations. Of course, the opposition is very happy to work with the Minister around any of those recommendations. We think it's vitally important that those recommendations are worked through. The Minister, we respect your decision, Minister, around working through those recommendations and looking at it. We acknowledge the calls from the sector around that ongoing investment. But I also want to just say thank you to all of the members of the Assembly. I want to acknowledge that we don't always agree on things. We have often the same objective in the end, but the road or the path that we take to get there is somewhat different. But I really want to thank honourable members for the respect we've had for one another in coming together on this particular topic, and the unified position that we're able to take today with the amendment and the amended motion that's been put up. I think this says to every single one of our constituents that this parliament does take domestic, family and sexual violence seriously, and we are demanding action, and that the Territory Legislative Assembly is doing all that it can, and that we are bringing in the other players, the other stakeholders into this important discussion and this important pathway forward where our women and children and vulnerable people can live in a world free from violence. So, Madam Speaker, I really am thankful to all honourable members and Minister Cahill. Thank you for working with the Chief Minister and the Leader of the Opposition to put forward the position moving forward. I think it's incredibly important. I do just make again the point in my closing remarks. I think that we also need to acknowledge the enormous work that is being done in the community this week as we work through and understand those 16 days of activism. It is incredibly important to just pay respect to the domestic family violence sector, acknowledge those 8 lives that have been lost since the middle of this year, and I think together we can continue to work tirelessly as a parliament to overcome those rates. And I think we've just proved so many people wrong in the community who often accuse all sides of politics with playing politics of an issue. I think that where we're at today with the Leader of the Opposition, Selina Ubo, the Chief Minister, the Member for Johnson, the Member for Mulcahy, the Member for Nightcliff, it's incredible that those 5 people coming together, working on a solid plan, will see a positive result for the Territory and just show everyone in the wider community that we can come together. The world is not completely divisive on issues. We can really come together and really do what's right for Territorians. Not to mention that we as a parliament have a role to make sure that we support the community in understanding what is being done and where the $180 million is being rolled out. So, Madam Speaker, I do and I will be absolutely supporting this motion as amended tonight, because it's a really wonderful opportunity as a parliamentarian to see the unity tonight. Thank you.
Member for Port Darwin.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In my report yesterday, there were just a couple of points that we made, I think, that are worth noting. That the cost financially to the Territory, $606 million per annum of domestic, family and sexual violence, but the emotional, social and physical cost is truly immeasurable. So with domestic violence rates 3 times higher in the Territory than the national average, and the Northern Territory domestic violence homicide rate 7 times the national average, there is no question that our Territory is in crisis. So I am incredibly reassured to hear that we are all going to stand together, thank you, on this very critical issue, and that we will take our message to the federal government that due to those very high rates in our community, we cannot continue to receive funding on a population basis. We must receive funding on a needs basis. And I appreciate the opposition's acceptance of the proposal that we bring a delegation from Canberra to here. In my experience in health over the past 3 decades, I found the only way to shift Canberra was to bring them here and show them face to face what we deal with. And I would argue that we don't just bring them to Darwin or to Alice Springs, but that we take them and we show them on the ground in our regional and remote areas exactly what everybody is dealing with. Let's not give them an option, anything other than getting on a charter with us, flying out there, seeing face to face what our communities are dealing with, hearing from the victims and the service providers exactly what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. Having said that, I do thank the member for Goyja for tabling the framework that we have referred to over the last few days. I think with the leave of the Parliament, Madam Speaker, I would like to also table both the summary report review of Action Plan 1 and the final status report of Action Plan 1, if I may be allowed to.
Yes. Is leave granted? Aye.
And the reason I do this, I think it's really important to actually read both sides of the story and understand why, working with the department and service providers, I am saying we do need to take a step back to make sure that we are getting this right. Because as attractive as the framework looks, when it came to implementing it on the ground, it was incredibly challenging. And some of the comments made in the review were that the Development of Action Plan 1 was compressed, required the bringing together of a diverse mix of initiatives. It was limited, lacked a strong, centralised quality assurance and coordination process. Some actions proved difficult to implement because they were broad, vague, or unclear and were peripheral to the central agenda of reducing domestic, family and sexual violence. This is the reason we need to take a step and make sure we're getting it right. This is the reason that I have gone out and consulted on the ground and continue to do so with service providers, with departmental staff, and with, on occasion, when they are willing to share their stories, survivors of domestic, family and sexual violence. So, again, I'm pleased to hear that we are in agreement that we cannot take the stance of business as usual, that we must take the fight together, not to Canberra, but bring Canberra to us. Show them what we are dealing with. Show them that the care and safety of our children is front and centre, that we will fight together to ensure that they acknowledge that our need is dire, and again, that funding must be provided on need, not pure number. So thank you for the opportunity to work together on this and deliver to our community what they so deserve, an opportunity to actually reverse what is happening and to make true inroads in reducing the incidence of domestic, family and sexual violence in our community.
Member for Nightcliff.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll just be brief. Thank you to the Leader of the Opposition for putting this motion forward, and thank you for the support across the chamber in the amendment. I also agree that it would be in everyone's best interest to get people here to the Territory and have a look on the ground. I want to raise something quickly that I'm slightly concerned that we've got a federal election coming up next year and we might have a different government. Here we're calling on the Commonwealth government to come down, and I am worried that if we get the federal government to come down and a change of government happens next year, we have Peter Dutton or whomever, and all our good work gets ripped up. So I would like to see, if we are calling on the Commonwealth government, including our Northern Territory senators, that we should also call on members of the federal coalition. The Greens may have the balance of power, members of the Greens. I think we would benefit from having a broader cross-section of the federal representatives coming here to have a look, because next year we might be looking at a very different situation, and I just don't want the work that we're going through now to be put to waste if there's a change of federal government next year. So I just wanted to note that. I am heartened to see us as an Assembly really standing together in unity on this. I wasn't sure it was going to happen. We have heard so much conversation in this chamber on crime and property crime and youth crime, and there are still members on this Assembly who haven't even uttered the word domestic violence. I want to back up the calls from the independent member for Johnson that this is the crime crisis that we are facing. And like I said in my initial speech to this Assembly, we must look at all crime through the lens of domestic family sexual violence. Why are children out on the street? Why do we have the levels of dysfunction and poverty? And we must be addressing it by looking at domestic family sexual violence. So yes, we need needs-based funding. That's why we're calling on the federal government. But we also have territory funds. And if we can find it in our coffers to put money for things like street upgrades and housing bonuses, we have the money to give to the sector. I also have met with many frontline services during my campaign. Many of them were very keen to meet with the Greens and myself and the other candidates because they were desperate for alternative voices in this Assembly. They said to me, we have got nowhere with either of the two major parties in the time that we need. So I met with many of them over the last 6 months, and they said time and time again, just put your money where your mouth is. No more consults, no more audits. They have been telling us what they need. Can we please get the money rolling to them? That is urgent. Thank you.
Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am too very happy to rise to support this motion. I strongly support it, and as others have said, it heartens me that this is an example of how we actually can work together as a chamber to make decisions about things that are of great importance to the Northern Territory. It's really wonderful to see us working together across the floor. This is good government, and all of us are here elected by our communities to take action on the issues that most concern them, and we know that this is an issue that affects everyone in all of our communities. And I strongly agree also with the Minister in saying that when we do have people coming here from Canberra, it's really important to actually take them to see what's happening on the ground across the Territory so they can understand what it is that we are trying to deal with here. We all know that we need needs-based funding to address the crisis, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens when we work together with Canberra to achieve that. However, I have to repeat that we cannot let this distract us from the urgency of what we can do right now, right here. I repeat again that I remain unable to understand why we cannot, as a chamber, take urgent action on our domestic, family and sexual violence crisis, our true crime crisis. As I've said, in this chamber today, in the Northern Territory, more than half the deaths by homicide are DV-related, 2 in 3 assaults are DV-related, more than 65% of people are in prison for DV-related issues, more than 65% of police time is spent on DV-related issues, more than 95% of the young people in detention are affected by DV. I'm sorry to have to continue to repeat these statistics. I wish I didn't have to. And if this government took action, I would not have to. I still cannot understand the rationale for no action. It's impossible for me to understand how the Minister can say she needs time to act on DV. I have no doubt that the Minister is deeply committed to addressing this issue and addressing it in the best way possible in a way that we know will work. I appreciate the Minister tabling the review of the Active Action Plan 1 today, and also the member for Gwadja tabling the Monitoring, Evaluation and Accountability Plan for Action Plan 2. I encourage people to have a look at these evaluation plans and reviews. I think that they are, as the Minister said, full of very important information that it's good for us to understand as we move forward and try and address this issue. This plan does not say that there is no way to evaluate. It says, and I can quote from the plan, it lays out a theory of change, it lays out a program logic, it lays out the data, it flags which actions will be evaluated and how. It directs a midpoint evaluation of the framework. It gives an outcomes evaluation. It sets out the monitoring process for all actions so there's accountability for actions in progress. It provides biannual public reporting on the status of every single one of the 60 actions in the plan, public and online. It's accountable, it's transparent and it's well planned. It was written by and approved by evaluation experts, including our own Treasury. We've been told clearly by experts, by survivors, by service providers, by the coroner what we need to do and what we know will work. Since the coronial recommendations came out, every single service provider, every single non-government organisation, every single sector worker has said we need to implement these recommendations as a matter of urgency. And I repeat that I welcome this motion, I welcome this chamber working together as I believe it should for the well-being of the whole Northern Territory. And I greatly look forward to going back to my electorate and letting the many people who continually raise this issue with me know that the chamber will be working together to address this. But when they ask me, does this mean there will be enough beds in women's crisis accommodation? Does this mean our frontline services will get the resources they need to keep us safe? Does this mean that over the holidays, when we are even less safe, the government will be doing something to help us? I will have to say no. The government is not ready to give the services the money that we know they need. I am really glad that we'll be working together to get the resources that we need to properly address this issue. And I'm sorry to the women and children that we are not taking action today to keep you safe when I know we could. I commit to doing everything I can towards that, towards a future where the crime crisis we face here is not the crisis of killing and harming women and children. Thank you, Madam Speaker.